Hey, I'm Dr. Notley, Winnipeg chiropractor and athletic therapist. And in episode 6 of the Own Your Spine podcast, we're going to be talking about developing a strength and conditioning program for those who don't have enough time. Now, the excuse of I don't have enough time, I'm going to call an excuse because I think many people can find the time. Not too long ago, I was looking at my phone and my phone actually tells me how much time I've spent on my phone throughout the week. And I was rather shocked that I had about 3 hours or more a day on my phone. Now, admittedly, some of this is used for business, uh, promoting myself on different social media platforms, and that made me realize that it can be an excuse, but for other people, that might not be the excuse. They may, have to wake up in the morning, catch a bus, takes them an hour, 2 hours to get to work. They have a hard, either physical or mental job. It's stressful. They have a lot of stress down on them. They then have to come home, another hour, 2 hour trip. In rush hour, they may be having to deal with the frustration of rush hour as well. They get home, they have to make supper, they have to spend time with their kids, they have to clean the house, they have to take care of the yard. There's lots of other things pulling them in other directions. I can see where time may be an excuse. So I want to develop a program that we can provide to a patient or a person who needs to improve their strength and muscle mass, but they don't have the time or they don't want to spend a lot of time. Admittedly, I think I'm that way right now. And part of that is I'm on social media. And I actually find that those little snippets of activity of flipping from one post to the next, being on it too long, it bores me. And so I'm thinking one of the reasons why I don't like working out for a long period of time may actually maybe because I need smaller chunks and I need to get away from those smaller chunks, but still get active. And I've done this in the past where I used to do 5 minute workouts and I built up the stamina and interest in exercising to the point where I was working out 20, 30 minutes using kettlebells and it worked really well. So, how can we develop a program that allows us to accomplish the goal of building strength and muscle mass in a timely manner? Now, I'm going to tell you this right off the bat that this type of program is not going to be based on optimal training, but it's to develop some strength and some muscle mass. When we look at developing a program to develop strength and muscle mass, we use what's called the FIT principle. Now, the FIT principle typically is dependent on the activity that we're wanting to improve upon or the function that we're wanting to improve upon. So if I want to improve my strength, I want to use certain fit principle. If I want to improve flexibility, there's a different type of fit principle. If I want to build my cardiovascular health, there's another fit principle. And these are used to develop optimal development of those characteristics. Now, the fit principle, what does it stand for? The fit principle is the F is frequency, that's how often we should be exercising. I is the intensity. T is the time, the amount of time that we spend within the activity. And type is the type of activity that we perform. If you want to build flexibility, you better be doing flexibility training or some type of mobility training. Want to build strength, we better be doing something that's going to be develop strength. So when we're trying to develop a strength and conditioning hypertrophy program, the general consensus for developing a strength and conditioning program for strength and hypertrophy, we work out 2 to 4 times a week, 2, 3, 4 times a week. Our intensity is dependent on our maximum lift, how much we can lift with one repetition. So the one repetition max. And if we want to develop strength, we're going to lift between 80 and 100% of our max. If we want to develop our muscle mass, we're going to do 60 to 80 percent, 60 to 80% of our one repetition max. We should be performing 2 to 4 sets, 3 to 12 repetitions per set. And in between each set, we should be doing 2 to 5 minutes of rest. And that depends on the goal. If we're leaning towards developing strength, we may be resting for longer periods of time. If we're wanting to improve Hypertrophy, we're going to look at a shorter period of time. And lastly, when it comes to the type, well, we should be training all muscle groups. There should be somewhere between 8 and 10 repetitions performed per workout. We should be using bands, weights, body weight, machines. We should also include a warm-up as well as a stretching program. Now, after hearing that, if I told somebody who doesn't like to work out, may have no experience, may not have the time, they're going to turn around and say, yeah, no, I'm not doing it. And I get it. That looks like a long workout. So the remainder of this podcast is based off the information from this research paper called No Time to Lift, Designing Time-Efficient Training Programs for Strength and Hypertrophy. It's a narrative review. It's written by Iverson et al., and I'll add the link in the show notes, and you can access it there if you want to read it yourself. So remember that this program is going to be based on minimum amount of training, get some improvement in both strength and hypertrophy. So when we look at the F in our FIT principle, frequency, we look at how often we should be working, generally 2 to 3, 2 to 4 times a week. But when it comes to minimal training, when they looked at the research, they actually found that we could actually work out once a week as long as the volume, the number of sets and reps that we perform is actually the same. So if you perform the same number of sets and reps in one workout, or you perform the same number of sets and reps in 3 workouts, still going to get the same benefits. So we could really go as minimal as one set if we wanted to. Flip that around, there may be a benefit, though the research isn't really out there yet, but we could also try microdosing. Now, microdosing would be short little workout, maybe about 15 minutes, might be performing maybe 1, maybe 2 sets or an exercise, and you do it more frequently. So you could work out 5 to 7 times a week. In my case, when I got back into doing kettlebells, though this wasn't a strength training program, I did start with micro dosing of 5-minute workouts, 2 exercises, X number of reps per exercise, and I just alternated back and forth. 5 minutes was done, I was done my workout. Next day, workout again. It was such an easy bite to take for a workout that I wasn't overly stressing my body, I wasn't sore, and I was motivated to do it again. And I continued to do that, and as I felt more confident and more capable, I increased my time and I built from there. Ultimately built up to doing workouts that are between 20 and 30 minutes. And that was a kettlebell program, and it worked very well for me. Life got in the way, things changed, I got to get back into it, and I'm working on that, and I'm actually using these principles that I'm going to be talking about in my own training program. So when it comes to frequency, we can do as little as 1 time a week, or we could do frequent to accomplish, as long as we're accomplishing the volume that we need to accomplish. Now, still related to frequency is volume. And the reality is that if we did 1 set for 10 repetitions in a week, if we all of a sudden do 3 sets in a week, our volume has tripled. So when it comes to volume, we want to look at the number of sets and reps in the week. Actually, more so, we're going to look at the number of sets, and that should be 2 to 4 sets a week. And we've already said earlier we should be working out 2 to 3 times a week. So we're looking at somewhere between 4 and 12 sets. That's a pretty broad range that we can see improvements. So when the researchers looked and tried to determine what the bare minimum that we can do, this is what they found. They found that 1 set 3 times a week can actually increase strength and hypertrophy. This is great for your new people or the older patients who have no experience. But they did find this. That worked really well for upper body, but for lower body, we needed three sets 3 times a week to see improvements. And also, as the trainees got in better shape, they actually found that 3 sets 3 times a week was better. Okay. Also, when it came to sets, one researcher found that the optimal amount of sets that we should be performing to develop strength and muscle mass is greater than 10 sets. Again, that sounds really daunting for somebody who can't exercise and don't have the time to exercise or interest to, but they did find that you still saw improvements with 5 or less sets per week. So if we're trying to do a minimalist approach, we can get 5 or less sets a week and still see some improvement. As we go into the I in the fit principle, we look at the intensity, how hard we're exercising. Reality is, for someone who doesn't exercise and doesn't have the experience, working with your one repetition max is exceptionally difficult because you don't have the training skills, don't have the experience to actually get your actual one rep max. So we go in more general terms and we can look at heavy, moderate, light, or we look at the number of repetitions that we perform that we're capable of performing with the weight that we're using. So if we want to improve strength, we're going to use heavier weights, and we're gonna fail somewhere between 1 and 5 repetitions. If we want to develop muscle mass, we're going to look at moderate weights somewhere between 6 and 12 repetitions. And if we don't have a lot of weights, or we want to develop our muscular endurance, we're going to be looking at somewhere between 15 and 25 repetitions. So when it comes to minimalist training, you can look at say, hey, look, 15 to 25 repetitions in a set. That's going to take a lot of time. Okay. Well, the interesting thing is if we want to develop strength, those higher repetitions, that's not optimal. Heavier loads help. Okay. And also heavier loads means less repetitions, therefore less time. And as I said, heavier loads help because they develop superior strength. Now, as I said, for somebody who doesn't have experience working at the heavier loads of 1 to 5 repetitions, that might be really difficult. So the authors actually recommend that we should be doing somewhere between 6 and 12 repetitions to failure. Now, here's the interesting thing. It was up on the previous slide that we can develop muscle mass regardless of the number of repetitions that we perform, as long as we go to failure. It is more difficult to go to failure in higher repetitions as fatigue starts to set in, but it is still possible. Now, the type of exercise that we should perform, there's lots of questions that we can ask. One is, should we be performing multi-joint exercises or single joint exercises? Now, a single joint exercise is an exercise that is like a bicep curl or a knee extension or calf raises or lateral raises. These use one joint for the most part. But multi-joint exercises are things like squats and deadlifts and push-ups and pull-ups and rowing and bench press. Those use multiple joints, multiple muscles. The nice thing is that multi-joint training is more effective in increasing strength and also more effective in improving our functional ability because most of our activities are multi-joint. So we might as well train for the activities that we're going to need to perform. In the case of my older patients, getting up off a chair, doing a box squat, multiple joints, ankles, knees, hips, they're all working. That develops all of those joints and the muscles around them. So it's important to look at a multi-joint type of exercise when we're trying to train. Also, we see greater strength improvements and more rapid strength improvements when we're using multi-joint exercises. So based on what the authors say, multi-joint, already explained that, that makes sense. Another question we might ask is should we be performing free weights or should we be performing machine exercises? Now, the interesting thing is as long as we're doing similar movements, for example, if you're using a machine that does a squat, or a machine that does a deadlift, or a bench press machine, or a row machine, or you're using barbells or dumbbells to perform those activities, the amount of strength and muscle mass is the same. So great, you can choose either. There's no superiority between those. But free weights is a little bit more lifelike because we need a little bit more stability as we do exercises. And that's an important thing because we don't have a machine helping us move around. Another thing that we can consider is that machines don't fit everybody. I'm not a big guy, and sometimes when I go to the gym, there's certain machines, the movement just does not feel normal. Sometimes I can't even do the movement because the amount of rotation and the way my body is relative to the rotation that it allows me to do, it's not the same and it's exceptionally difficult. But machines may be more safer for most people, especially if they don't have experience. If you don't have the experience, machines may be a better fit. Also, for some people, free weights can be quite intimidating. They may be surrounded by people who have a lot of experience, the uh, muscular men walking around, or fit women walking around. It feels really daunting to try and do what they're doing. And there may be the free weights may be a little bit less safe because falls can occur. But typically, it's not the movement that's the problem. It's more people maybe tripping over something or falling, and they don't have, the machine's not going to fall. Not likely if the machine's held down properly. But there's a little bit greater risk factor when it comes to that, and also a greater learning curve if you're trying to do free weights. Another question we can ask related to this is, should we be doing barbells or dumbbells? Well, the reality is, if we use barbells, we can lift 20% heavier for our one repetition max. So we stimulate our body more. So we may get more stimulus doing a barbell. And we also see, and based on that, we can have greater increase in strength and muscle mass. So when it comes to our decision as to whether we should be using free weights or machines, it really depends. If you don't have access to barbells and dumbbells, use equipment. You don't have the experience, machines might be better. If you have the equipment and you feel confident with using free weights, go for it. It's an excellent approach, but don't worry about how much stimulus you'll get. It'll be similar. Another question we have is whether we should be doing bilateral or unilateral exercises. A bilateral exercise is using both sides at the same time. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, shoulder press, lateral raise, that's a bilateral movement. If I'm doing a squat, that's a bilateral movement. So too is a deadlift. Unilateral movements is performing one side at a time. So alternating bicep curls, alternating lateral raises, a lunge versus a squat, a single leg deadlift. Those all are more unilateral. Another example, unilateral would be a side lunge or a Cossack squat. Works one side over the other. So which is better? One, bilateral training, lift heavier, we have more force output, we can stimulate things more. Unilateral training, though, develops more core stability and joint stability. So there may be a benefit in doing that with unilateral training. Thing is, if you're doing unilateral training, you go through your 10 repetitions. Now you got to go through 10 repetitions on this side. It's taking twice as long. So time might be a factor when it comes to that. But when it comes to strength, power, and muscle mass, the reality is both of them actually result in similar amounts. So time comes into the question, where bilateral training may create more stimulus and be more time efficient. But if you work out from home and you only have a certain amount of weights, you might have to do unilateral training, but don't worry, you're still going to achieve your goals that you want to improve on strength and muscle mass. Another question we have is elastic bands. Should we be using band training? Now, in my practice, a lot of patients are starting out pretty weak in certain areas, and we use bands. And I think it's a starting point. I think we need to take that band, which tends to be a lighter band, and we have to either make those bands heavier, or we have to graduate people away from bands into more resistance training. When we match the amount of weight that is produced by a body weight exercise or a resistance based exercise, weight base versus an elastic band, if we match that, we can get similar effects. The reality is, for the lower body, the amount of stimulus that we place on the leg muscles is significantly less when we use bands. Also, if we want to get to that really heavy weight that we might be able to perform with for our lower body, like a squat, it's going to be pretty awkward just having this big heavy band over our shoulders or in our hands. And so it might be a little bit more awkward and a little bit more difficult to actually accomplish the goal of building strength and muscle mass. So the recommendation here is that we should probably be using some type of conventional exercise equipment heavy multi-joint exercises, whether you're especially for the lower limb, but we may be able to do that with some of our upper limb exercises to a point. Another question we have is, what about body weight training, squats, air squats, push-ups, pull-ups. Now, when it comes to pull-ups, chin-ups, push-ups, we can develop strength. It is a possibility. And the thing is that when we want to make exercises harder, for example, if you can't do a push-up, oftentimes we'll start people with from their knees and doing a push-up. Graduating from on your knees to on your toes may be a dramatically significant increase that you may be unable to perform the activity. So the changes that we can make to make body weight exercises harder really result in a significant change in uh, the way of doing the activity, which can be difficult, but it is doable. When it comes to lower body training, body weight, we can, for somebody who can't do a lot of squats and they don't have the strength to do that, we can do that. We can develop some strength with body weight. We can then graduate it towards more of like a semi single leg squat to a single leg squat. But from there, we can't really see a greater strength beyond that. And so there's some limitations for the lower limb. So we're really not certain that we can develop the goals that we want for the lower limb, but we may be able to do that with the upper limb. And in my opinion, to a point, we have to get to the point where we go, hey, how do we make a pull up harder if we can already do 12 pull ups? Well, then we have to add bands or a wet vest, and now we're getting into resistance based training. So that that's the same as using weights. So really, when it comes to body weight training, if we train to failure, remember, we can achieve our goals, but it's going to be into higher repetitions. Uh, but is that time efficient when we have to do higher repetitions? You can do it. It's an option if you're kind of failing within that 6 to 12 rep range. So there are also things that we have to consider as time-saving methods. How can we shave off time so that we can get out of the gym faster? Common guidelines, if we want to build up our maximum strength, we're going to be wanting to work between 3 and 5. We want to rest between 3 and 5 minutes. If we want to develop hypertrophy, it's 1 to 2 minutes. And if we want to gain muscular endurance, we're going to rest somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds. Now, they did find that we could still see improvement in strength and muscle mass when we're working between 1 and 2 minutes of rest. So somewhere within that time frame, we should be resting. So we can work as little as 1 minute. Another option that we can do for time saving is what's called superset. Now, a superset is where we take an exercise. For example, we take a bicep curl and immediately follow it up with a tricep extension or a squat or something, some different movement, so that you can get through 2 exercises in about the same amount of time as you would get one. So in essence, you're cutting your workout in half if you're doing that. This may cause some fatigue and reduce our muscular performance because we're not getting enough rest for the body for the movement. But there may be still some improvements with that. Another way that we can shave off some time is doing drop sets. So in the case of a drop set, what you do is you take a weight, perform as many repetitions to failure, you drop the weight down by a percentage, do a few more reps, drop it again, and you may drop it between 1 and 3 drops. Now, this has been shown to increase our muscle hypertrophy, but it's not inferior to developing strength. So if our goal is to build strength, this might not be the appropriate way to shave off some time. It does provide shorter duration uh, with minimal to no reduction in training volume. Nice. Still accomplish what we can with less time. Cool. But like I said, you want to develop strength, it's not going to happen. And also, they've actually found with this method that it's more superior for doing single joint exercises. So you can imagine doing a set to failure with a heavy squat and drop the weight, your legs are fatiguing. Personally, I think there comes a point, if you're not well trained, that this is going to end up being a source for injury, uh, alteration in movement under load, and something might happen. I wouldn't do it unless I'm in a safe environment. Maybe a safer environment would be working with machines, and a lot of the machines are single joint machines. Another way to save time is that we do a rest pause. This is kind of a nice one. What you do is there's actually two methods. You perform a set, rest for 4 to 6 seconds, and you're staying with the same weight. Usually you're working one rep, near our 1 rep max. So heavy bench press, put the weight down, rest for a few seconds. Heavy bench press, you repeat until you hit that point of failure, and you're done. Or the number of repetitions that you want to perform, and then you're done. Another way is that we perform a set to failure, we rest 20 seconds, and then we perform another set to failure and repeat until we achieve the desired number of repetitions that we want to accomplish in that workout. The nice thing with this is that we're staying with the same weight, so the amount of load is there. We're allowing for some rest, so we're be able to maintain some of our speed of our movement, which the faster we perform a movement, the more stress that we can place on the musculature, and also helps us maintain our power. So this may be an excellent way, especially if you're trying to develop strength. Another thing we need to consider is that warm up. Remember at the beginning when I was telling you that we need to provide a warm up. Typically, the warm ups there's two types. We're working with a general warm up, which is kind of like just getting our body warmed up. You might do some air squats and jumping jacks. You might go for a run. Just a short amount of exercise just to get our body warm. And then there's more specific warm ups, and these warm ups are typically for the activity that we're gonna do. If I were playing Ultimate, what I want to do is I want to be throwing. I do want to be doing some sprinting and cuts and just getting my body ready for the activity. If I'm doing weight training and I'm using a heavier weight, I may be wanting to use a lighter weight and do a bench press, or a lighter weight and do a squat, getting the body ready for the next set or future sets that you're going to perform. Now, there is little evidence that general warm-ups actually help improve our strength training. So if we're trying to improve strength, we may not need to do that general warm-up. So we can actually save some time there. And there is some evidence, though, is if we do perform a specific warm-up, it actually improves our ability to lift heavier loads. But like I said, if we're wanting to lift heavier loads, we may want to do an activity that is similar. So bench press, lighter weight for the bench press. We may want to do a couple light sets, not to failure, just to get the body moving, and then get into our working sets. So cutting out the general warm-up may be beneficial in many cases. If we're working higher repetitions, we may not even need to work a warm-up in, because the load isn't high enough to, it's not needed to actually do a warm-up. And what about stretching? Stretching is actually really controversial. I think in a future podcast, I'm going to probably interview somebody who can talk a little bit more about stretching, because they're a little bit more of an expert, so they can explain things better to me. But when it comes to stretching, this is what they've found. If you do a long stretching program leading up to an activity, a short bursts type activity. So if you're stretching 30 to 60 minutes, we actually see a 22% reduction in strength loss. So if you did all this stretching out your chest, getting all things stretched out, triceps, everything stretched out, and then you go and try and lift a heavy bench press, you're not going to be as strong. You're not going to be able to perform as well. Even in shorter stretch sessions, we're going to see an 8% loss of strength. That's in acute bouts of strength training afterwards. Okay, so we're not talking, hey, I'm going to do this short stretch, and 2 hours later I'm going to do a jump or a sprint or something like that. We're not going to see that effect then. Now, there is some evidence that with regular stretching, we may also impair our strength and power. But this applies to long stretch programs and not short stretch programs. The other thing is, we don't see a decrease in our strength if we're performing dynamic stretching. This is taking the body through a motion, getting a stretch, coming back out of it, dropping down to squat, going through a full range of motion, coming back out of it. We're just taking the joints and muscles through a full range of motion. We don't see an effect on that type of stretching. We also don't see an effect of stretching on reduction in muscle soreness. So if our goal is to stretch because we want to reduce the amount of muscle soreness that we have after a workout, we're not helping ourselves. So really, we can For the most part, cut out some of our stretching. Maybe use a dynamic stretch. And in the case of resistance training, I think the dynamic stretching is actually part of the warm up where we're taking our muscles through a full range of motion. If I want to do a squat, I want to warm up a squat, I take my joints through a full range of motion during that time. Dynamic stretch is a dynamic warm up. So let's bring it all together. What have these researchers said about time efficient strength and hypertrophy program? They recommend you should be working between 2 to 4 times a week, or as little as 1 time a week, as long as we're keeping our volume the same. How hard should we be working out? Somewhere between 6 and 12 repetitions, every heavy, moderate weight. Leaning towards the heavier side, we may see a little bit more strength. We're leaning towards the moderate side, we may develop a little bit more muscle mass. We should be working out, having at least 5 sets a week. The repetitions, 6 to 12 repetitions, as I said in the intensity, 6 to 12 repetition max. So we're working within that range. And we can rest as little as 1 minute. So that's ways of saving time. The type of exercises that we should be performing, we should be doing multi-joints. We should be doing, and I kind of added to the recommendation here, and I don't have it in the slide. We should be doing pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging movements, and those would be squats, uh, 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 single leg deadlifts, those type. Sorry, I said squats, deadlifts, single leg deadlifts, and we should also be doing some type of ab workout as well. So we get 5 different exercises that we can be performing, and 5 sets of each. And we can be using machines, we can be using weights, we can use body weight if we want, we can use bands if we want. I've already talked about those limitations. If we're experienced, we might want to do drop sets, we might want to use rest pause, we might want to do supersets. We may choose to ignore a general warm-up, may want to consider a dynamic warm-up, may want to consider not stretching or performing some sort of dynamic stretching program. So there you have it. That's a way that you can save time, spend as little time as you need, and still see benefits. And this is where I think this isn't a forever program. I think what this does is that this gets you going and maybe realizing that you do have more time. Maybe in my case, where I find that I just don't want to be there, I may feel like I'm not in shape. I want to get back to doing the other more enjoyable activities. That this might be a way for you to just get the ball rolling. And then when you feel and realize that you can put more time into this, you can start developing the program and leaning towards the more general um, recommendations to develop strength and hypertrophy. I hope you enjoyed episode 6 of the Own Your Spine podcast. If you have any questions, feel free and ask.